As the 18th century became the 19th, and the 19th the 20th, the world from Paris to Tokyo was feeling the effects of an age of revolution. There had been political revolutions in France, Japan, and America, and there was soon to be one in Russia. The Industrial Revolution had radically changed economies and the wealth of European nations. There was a spirit that the old ideas were finished and newer modern ideas were needed. The new modernists, heirs to the Age of Enlightenment, with a decidedly Western chauvinism, saw human progress as linear and inevitable. Musicians, writers, and artists strove to find new means of expression for this new age. One group of artists even called themselves the Futurists and tried to find ways to express the new speed of this modern life. But not everyone benefited from these changes. The new capitalism required more and more resources to fuel its demand for growth. Indigenous peoples from non-Western countries saw their land stolen and resources exploited. Conflict between cultures that had no desire to change, and the juggernaut that the West called progress, was unavoidable. As people flocked to urban areas to partake in the new economies, cities struggled to provide adequate housing and services. Soon the discrepancy between rich and poor began to tear at the fabric of Europe. A return to a policy of imperialism exacerbated this conflict of cultures and soon led to World War I. In Zurich, far from the actual fighting, some artists struggled with how art might remain relevant in a continent being torn apart. They saw the current forms of art as another symptom of the fetish with reason that had brought the world to this state of war. They felt that art must be remade, and if rationality was the enemy, then irrationality must be the hero. In this, the movement known as Dada was born. One of the main techniques of the Dada artists was photomontage. By combining random images and text, they hoped to create absurd and irrational objects that would question the nature of art and shock the masses out of their acceptance of the status quo. However, as the war ended and Europe began to rebuild, the nihilism of the Dada artists fell out of favor among their fellow artists. While many approaches were being used in art making, in general, expression through the modernist ideas of abstraction re-emerged as a dominant style permeating the post-war Western art world. But the effects of Dada were not completely lost. In the mid-20th century, new art and literary theorists began to deconstruct the ideas behind modernism and the chauvinism inherent in the Western way of thinking. New developments in the physical and social sciences began to show the interconnectedness of systems and the nonlinear relationships between events. Other nations challenged the economic and political supremacy of Europe and America. We still struggle with these issues of power, income inequality, and human rights today. For art, these postmodern ideas meant a change in what was acceptable artistic practice. Process became more important than product. A comfort with multiple perspectives allowed artists to create pastiches of multiple techniques, images, and cultural sources. In this video, we are going to take a look at some artists who purposely create visual, thematic, and contextual layers in their work. Due to its eclectic nature, postmodern art doesn't lend itself to easy classification. Nevertheless, the work of Robert Rauschenberg is often referred to as Neo-Dada. Reacting to the prevalence of abstract painting in the 1950s, Rauschenberg began to combine images from popular mass media with abstract painting devices. Rauschenberg used anything and everything in his work. He utilized things he found on the street, old packaging, pioneered a photo transfer technique, and even used his actual bed in a painting. He said, "I think art is more like the real world if it is made of the real world." Rauschenberg would become one of America's most important and influential artists. Romare Bearden was an African-American painter. In 1964, he began experimenting with collage. His work reflected the civil rights movement in the U.S. at the time. His collages evoke the experience of African Americans living in Harlem, then a New York City slum. The work of Sigmar Polk from the 60s and 70s explores the images of a consumer society and the political situation in Germany at the time. His later works used a computer to manipulate images, and the results were machine printed onto large pieces of fabric. Initially interested in surrealism, Arnulf Rainer started his series called Destruction of Forms in 1954. An Austrian artist, Rainer was loosely affiliated with several artists who did work that became known as Vienna Actionism. Although never an official group, the work of these artists rejected the production of artifacts in favor of actions that often used the body in violent and ritualistic ways. Nancy Spiro was one of the initial women artists from the 60s and 70s whose work directly addressed feminist issues. Her work speaks to themes of women and their representation in culture. She develops her own symbology, using the body as hieroglyph. Her work also used non-traditional supports, like long scrolls and wall installations. The large paintings of Julie Moretu overlay images from architectural drawings, blueprints, charts, and maps to elicit the sense of some emerging landscape. Combining drawing and painting techniques, her artworks become rich tableaus of visual information seen simultaneously from multiple perspectives. A very influential artist in Japan, Takashi Murakami, has looked for a style that is uniquely Japanese. Looking at traditional Japanese art and the low art of manga and anime, Murakami arrived at a style he dubbed superflat. This superflat idea for Murakami also described Japanese post-war culture. Another Japanese artist, Yayoi Kusama, first made her mark in the US. Arriving in America in 1957, she became involved in the avant-garde scene in New York. Working in painting, sculpture, installation, and performance art, she was influential among the pop and minimal artists of that era. While in New York, she had a decade-long romantic, though sexless, relationship with the shy Joseph Cornell. Returning to Japan in 1970 and suffering from some psychiatric problems, she voluntarily checked herself into a psychiatric hospital where she still lives. She is seen as one of the most important living Japanese artists. An interest in nature and science informed the work of Nancy Graves. Initially a sculptor, in 1972 she abandoned that medium and began painting. Her interest in layering materials remained and manifested in her paintings in her Camouflage and Lunar series. Graves' use of lunar maps gave her a way to literally play with space in a way not done before. In the 1980s, graffiti was both the rage and the bane of urban communities. Seen by some as art and others as vandalism, graffiti brought exciting images to an urban blight. But it was also implicated in gang shootouts in Los Angeles and other U.S. cities. The New York subway became the canvas for many graffiti artists. Kenny Schraff's graffiti-style paintings and installations, along with the work of Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring, helped bring graffiti into the mainstream art world. Judy Pfaff is a painter and printmaker who came to prominence in the 1980s, but her most commanding work is her room-sized installations. Using natural items from the forest around her studio and industrial elements, she forges elaborate layers of materials that the New York Times have called collages in space. When Susong's studio burnt down, all his work was lost. From the fragmented remains and ash, Su reinvented his work using the material to build up images inspired by different aspects of Chinese culture. A close observation of Su's work shows a complex collection of images below a surface of translucent paint. Originally from Oklahoma, but raised in Texas, Trenton Doyle Hancock's work comprises a vast and complicated narrative. He chronicles the life of characters he has named the Mounds, which are preyed upon by the evil Vegans. Hancock's paintings are like explosions of materials overlaid with drawing and text. Known as the Invisible Man, Chinese artist Louis Bolin uses layering in a different way. He places himself in various scenarios and then his assistants paint him so that he literally blends into the background. Bolin is interested in the way society makes us invisible. The scenarios he chooses make both cultural and political statements about living in a globalized China. Adolf Wolfli had no artistic training and did all his work as a patient at a psychiatric hospital in Switzerland. He suffered from terrible hallucinations, and drawing seemed to be the only thing that calmed him down. His doctor, Walter Morgenthaler, wrote in his diary about Wolfli, "Every Monday morning, Wolfli is given a new pencil and 2 large sheets of unprinted newsprint. The pencil is used up in 2 days. Then he has to make do with the stubs he has saved or whatever he can beg off someone else. He often writes with pieces only 5 to 7 millimeters long, and even with the broken off points of lead, which he handles deftly, holding them between his fingernails. He carefully collects packing paper and any other paper he can get from the guards and the patients in his area. Otherwise, he would run out of paper before next Sunday night. At Christmas, the house gives him a box of colored pencils, which last him 2 or 3 weeks at the most." In 1908, Wolfli began work on an epic story of his life that eventually came to 25,000 pages and 1,600 illustrations detailing his transformation from Knight Adolf to Saint Adolf. George Herms was an influential artist in California during the 1960s and 70s. He is most known for using found objects and assembling them into sculptures and collages. Herms' works transforms mundane objects into a kind of layered visual poetry. The south side of Los Angeles, where Mark Bradford grew up, is a tough side of town. Bradford uses the signs for shady businesses that are posted all over his neighborhood and incorporates them into huge works that are reminiscent of urban maps and aerial views of cities. His working methods include building up multi-layered surfaces and then sanding them down to reveal new combinations of elements. In Wang Ho's photographic series, My Things, he chronicles things from his own life. Wang's generation lived through the Cultural Revolution, and his photo montages, which are done on a computer and then printed, reveal the continued influence of the revolution in the life of the Chinese. Although large in scale, the works reveal an intimate look at the personal life of the artist. Julian Schnabel was the bad boy of New York in the art scene of the 1980s. Making outrageous statements about his own worth, like "I'm the closest thing you'll see to Picasso in this lifetime," did not endear him to his colleagues. However, this outrageousness brought him attention. His work, along with artists like David Solly and Ross Bleckner, ushered in a new expressionism and revived painting as a medium in an art scene that was dominated by sculpture and installation art. Painting on broken pottery, Schnabel's surfaces are thick, heavy, and have a distinctly macho attitude. Photographers, using either Photoshop or multiple negatives, have the advantage of layering images that appear on one flat plane. Dagmar Keller and Martin Whitwer work as a team. Their photographs explore the dichotomy between real people and the Photoshop people we see in the media. Nir Ariely began his career as a photographer for the Israeli army. After he left the military, he became entranced by the world of dance. His hybrid images of dancers highlight the power and grace of his subjects. Spanish artist Victoria Pujadas paints on tops of photographs. Her work, like that of Keller and Whitwer, questions the relationship between fashion images and actual life. Layering in art takes many forms. Leonardo's sfumato technique, the building up of thin layers of paint, is what gives the Mona Lisa its translucent luster. The artists we have looked at in this video use layering in many different technical ways. But the layering also reveals a combination of hidden treasures that help form the gestalt of the artwork's meaning. While these treasures often arise spontaneously and are not directly planned, these artists have mastered their process and know that in the process the meaning of the work will emerge.